Thanks for joining us on the program today. At least 5 people have been killed after Russian missiles hit Ukraine's biggest cities. It comes as President Vladimir Putin promised to intensify attacks on the country. One woman was killed in the city of Kharkiv, while 44 others were injured. Over in Kyiv, Major Vitaly Klitschko said that 2 people died and 49 people were wounded in a strike on a block of flats in a district of the capital. 2 more deaths were reported in the area bordering Kyiv region. Last week, Russia launched its biggest aerial bombardment of the war, killing more than 40 people. Ukrainian forces responded with an attack on the Russian border city of Belgorod on Saturday, killing 25 people and injuring more than 100 others. President Putin vowed the attack would not go unpunished. His Ukrainian counterpart said since Sunday alone, Moscow had fired 170 drones and dozens of missiles. And just this morning, the Ukrainian Interior Ministry released a video purportedly showing emergency services rescuing people following Russia's most recent attacks. We see a man with a bandage on his head walking away from a building carrying a dog while a woman was being led down a ladder. Emergency services were also seen outside a destroyed building and helping a man out. This comes as Russia makes good its promise to retaliate Ukrainian attacks on its cities over the weekend. And more on the attack in the northern city of Kharkiv. One 91-year-old woman was killed and at least 44 civilians injured, and that's according to Regional Governor Ole Synohubov. Many residential buildings also appeared heavily damaged as emergency services sought to evacuate casualties on site. In the meantime, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been commenting on Russia's recent attacks on his country. In a video address, the president also vowed Russia will answer for every life taken away. He says at least 70 missiles were shot down and almost 60 of them were in the Kyiv region. He also mentions Kharkiv. According to Ukraine's army chief, the air defenders shot down 10 missiles, 59 cruise missiles, and 3 caliber missiles launched by Russia.
Ukrainians on January the 2nd, 2024, there were once again strikes from the Russian non-humans. They used almost 100 missiles of different kinds. At least 70 missiles were shot down, almost 60 of them in the Kyiv area. There also were brutal strikes on Kharkiv. I thank everyone in the world who helps, Patriots, IRIS, NASAMS. Every such system has at least saved hundreds of lives. Russia will answer for every life taken away. Glory to Ukraine.
In the meantime, the Russian president is still fuming about the Ukrainian strikes on the Russian city of Belgorod, which killed 20 people and wounded more than 100 others, describing the move as a terrorist act. He promised Russia will continue to strike sensitive military targets in Ukraine. Russia denies Western and Ukrainian accusations that it targets civilian infrastructure. He says the course of the war in Ukraine is changing in Russia's favor, and that Moscow hopes to end the conflict, but only on its own terms. Well, let's bring in former President, American Center on International Leadership, Stephen Hayes. A warm welcome to you on this program.
Good afternoon, and Happy New Year to you.
I wish you a Happy New Year too. So what do you make of the intensity of Russia's airstrikes on Ukraine in the last days of 2023 and the beginning of the new year?
Well, it shouldn't be too surprising. It's going into this year. I think Putin wants to send a message that it's going to continue. I think it also comes at a time where the decision-making process in the U.S. is up for grabs right now, and I think he wants to put as much uncertainty to that process with Congress as he can. So I think also he needs to show to the Russian people that, at least in his version of the war, that he's winning. So I think it shouldn't be surprising. I think it's going to continue, particularly at a time when support for Ukraine, particularly in weapons and so forth, is somewhat uncertain.
And, President Vladimir Putin is making good his promise of punishing Ukraine for responding to last week's attacks with its own attacks on Belgorod. It seems every time Ukraine retaliates on Russia's attacks, President Putin is more infuriated. This back and forth means no end in sight for the war, which will be entering its second year just next month. Is this Mr. Putin's goal, perhaps, to do that?
Well, I think his goal is, in fact, to win and to get the concessions that he wants, which are the 4 provinces on the Black Sea that now are part of Ukraine, as well as Crimea. So his goals are going to continue. I find it interesting that he considers that he considers it infuriating that the Ukrainians have actually responded in a small way compared to the massive amount of attacks that have been on Ukraine. So, but that's again part of the propaganda war. I think his goal is to eventually be able to say that he has won by having those 4 provinces as well as Crimea.
And Ukraine appeared to be a little surprised, by the attacks that happened this morning. And the capital, Kyiv and Kharkiv, appeared to be the most targeted areas. What would it mean for the war if Kyiv is brought to its knees? I mean, I know President Zelenskyy says that he's in the capital, but no one really knows where he is.
Well, his broadcast was from inside the Capitol, and to his credit, he's been fairly honest about where he is generally. So I would take him at his word that he's in Kiev. I don't think he's going to pinpoint his location any more than Mr. Putin is. I think that whether Ukraine is brought to its knees or not, it remains to be seen. I think that's still very much in doubt. I think that a victory right now for Russia would mean those 4 provinces. I don't think it would mean a total capitulation for Ukraine. I don't see Ukraine totally capitulating, which would mean absorption into the Russian Empire, or the old Soviet Union, in fact. So I think I think that won't happen because despite all the uncertainty and the waning interest in this war at this particular time, that Europe and the United States cannot afford to see that happen.
Right, and international support for Ukraine appears to be on an all-time low. Congressional approval is not yet on ground in the U.S. Both the U.S. and the U.K. promised large military aid. The U.K. promising at least 200 missiles. This is not coming to Ukraine free of charge, right? So in the end, what do you think will be the cost of the war, apart from the apparent loss of lives?
Well, the cost of the war is going to be huge. Financially, it's already into the six-figure bill. What I call the six-figure billions, into more than $100 billion, $200 billion. So it's going to be a phenomenal cost. It's also going to be a massive rebuilding job for Ukraine, and who pays for that is going to really be determined by the outcome. I think the real cost, too, is going to be determined by who is seen as the winner of this. If Russia does prevail, rather than a stalemate, then I think it's going to mean more uncertainty in the world and more fear. So I think it remains to be seen what the costs are, but the costs clearly are going to be very, very high. It's going to be damaging, particularly to the Ukrainian economy. They are purchasing the weapons and so forth, so they're going to owe that. So it's going to have to be a whole new recalibration of debt after this war.
Right, and in this, we know that President Putin has said that he's going to retaliate every retaliation Ukraine makes on Russia for whatever attack Russia has made on Ukraine. Very funny, twisting stories there. But how well prepared do you think Ukrainian troops are now that, the support being promised by the outside world is not coming as, it's supposed to come? And Russia appears to be just, having a swell time, just attacking Ukraine, whether it has support from the outside world or not?
Right now, I think you're right. The perception is that Russia is beginning to win this. There are a number of problems. Certainly, the U.S. Congress is slow to support. I think it will support. The new Speaker of the House is actually in support of that, but he has a small and very vocal minority that can stop this. So I think that's going to be a problem. The U.K. is also some of the same interest in the war is waning somewhat, but the majority is still showing that the majority of the population and the polls still show support for Ukraine. So I think that's going to continue over the next year, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. I think that within Ukraine, there's got to be a combination of growing determination to resist. At the same time, ironically, we're becoming very weary of the war. Civilians are targeted. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Otherwise, all the apartment buildings, the government buildings that are being hit wouldn't be being hit. So that's part of the war. So that's going to, the psychology of that is to wear down the civilian population. So I think this is going to be a very critical year, and I think that this year will determine probably the end of this war.
Right, and you did mention that the Congress eventually will still approve the support for Ukraine. But on the long run, do you think that America will be able to continue to support Ukraine through this?
Being able and wanting to is a different thing.
They're two different things.
Right? And I think they could. Yeah, are they able? Yes. Will they be willing after another year? We don't know, and we don't know that because we don't know the outcome of the election in 2024 in November. So this year, actually. So it's. I think that the continuing support for Ukraine will be determined in two things. One is the war still going on at the time of the elections, and then who wins the elections. And I think that will determine. I do think that Congress will approve the continuing support for Ukraine, whether it's as much as asked, we'll see, and whether President Biden is willing to do something about the border issues that we have, which is the main reason that Congress hasn't approved the support for Ukraine right now. They want some action along the border in return for support for Ukraine, and I think that will happen.
Right, and speaking of support, President Vladimir Zelenskyy, is trying to be strong for his people. He's making those addresses, encouraging them, encouraging the troops, encouraging the people that we will get through this. But if we can read his mind, I'm not sure if we can, but do you really think is that mentally strong, or do you think that he's just being strong for the people?
Well, I think he's strong for the people. I think he's also proving to be a very mentally strong person. I think that if I were in his mind, I'd be concerned. I'd be concerned about what's happening in the United States. I'd be concerned about Hungary and its blocking of European support. I'd be concerned about Turkey also not being the most stalwart of allies for NATO and Europe. Both those countries are leaning towards more support for Russia, although I think Turkey would deny that. I think but in reality, it is helping Russia. So I think that if I were Mr. Zelenskyy or President Biden or any number of other people, I'd be worried right now about all this and how we can shore up support and move forward.
And the other downside to this is that attention has been so focused on the other war, that's the Israeli war with Hamas. That crisis on the African continent as well has been pushed to the back burner. It's interesting that the American government is not responding to recent killings in Nigeria's Plateau State, for instance, or elsewhere on the continent, but is quick to put out a security alert where there might be American citizens involved.
That's a fair criticism. I think it's very fair. it's hard to defend that. We would say, I think the official version is that we're in support of all peaceful actions, we condemn all war effort or terrorism and so forth. But the reality is that we view our national interests more as European, and I think that's a problem as well. I think we need to see that Africa is in our long-term interest, perhaps more than almost any other area of the world, but it's hard for the U.S. to see that at this time. And I think as a result, there's a lot of suffering elsewhere. Plateau State would be one. Sudan right now would be another area. You can name any number of places in Africa that would benefit by stronger U.S. support.
Right, and I do know that, America is considered as, the superpower. But do you think that there's too much expectation placed on, America and its government? To see what else is happening everywhere.
That's an easy question, I think, to answer. I think, yes, there's too great of expectation of the U.S., and at the same time, I think there's too much self-deception in the U.S. as well. We see ourselves still, I think, in a pre-year 2000 world, and the world has changed really very dramatically over the last 20 years, certainly over the last 10 years, where it's multipolar. It's not one single superpower any longer. And I think it's not even a bilateral China-U.S. I think it's far more interest, changing dynamics that the U.S. has been slow to adapt to. And I think that's going to be difficult because of our own history. But I think one of the areas that we really need to step up efforts is with Africa.
Right. Stephen, thanks again for your contribution, and a Happy New Year once again to you.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you very much. It's an honor as usual. Thank you.